Attention, full version in the comments. That afternoon, after work, I just couldn't take it anymore. It had been 3 whole days since David and I had been together, and every hour away from him felt like a month. My body still remembered the touch, the smell, the warmth of his skin against mine, and the longing. The longing was so great that it hurt in my chest, physically, throbbing, as if something inside me was being slowly torn away. I know. I know what a lot of people would say if they heard this. Damn, Thomas. What do you mean? Falling in love on the first date? I know. I swear I know. I thought that too. I tried to convince myself that it was an exaggeration, that I was too emotional, that it was just lust mixed with years of pent-up longing. But it wasn't. It wasn't just that. I fell in love, yes, madly, with the intensity of someone who spent a lifetime repressing every part of who they really are, who grew up hiding their feelings, who dreamed 1,000 times in silence of that kind of connection and never experienced one. And then, out of nowhere, David appeared. It wasn't by chance. I swear with everything in me that it wasn't a coincidence. It was destiny. It had to be. He, my first man, and I, his first man. We found each other like two parts of something that had waited decades to recognize each other. It wasn't just skin. It wasn't just a kiss. It wasn't just bodies. It was soul, it was looks, it was presence. And that's why that feeling grew so fast. Because it already existed in me, hidden, stifled, and all it took was David's touch for it to explode. That afternoon I got home, threw my keys on the hall table, took off my shoes right there, dropped my briefcase on the living room floor, and sat on the sofa like someone carrying the weight of a choice they no longer know how to postpone. My cell phone was in my pocket. I could feel it there, burning, as if calling me. I knew David had sent me a message, as he had done every day since that night, but I still hadn't responded as he deserved. Because fear still held me back. Fear of what would come next. Fear of breaking the life I had built to please others. But that day, fear lost. That afternoon I decided I needed to see David again. I picked up my phone with trembling hands, as if each finger knew exactly what I needed to do, even before I had the courage. I typed with my heart in my throat, "Good afternoon, David. I want to see you. Where are you?" The reply came in seconds, as if he were already there, on the other side, waiting for me the whole time. "Hi, gorgeous. Good afternoon. I'm at home. Come over. I'm waiting for you. I miss you so much." When I read that, an electric shock ran through my entire body. I didn't think twice. I quickly wrote a message to my wife, my voice almost trembling in my mind. "I'm going out to dinner with some friends from work, okay? I'll be back later." She replied with just an, "Okay," as always. Cold, distant, automatic. And that hurt, because then I realized the gap between us and what I was about to experience with David wasn't betrayal. It was truth. I left the house with my heart racing, an anxiety that mixed fear, longing, excitement, and an absurd desire to simply hug him, feel him, look at him again. On the way, the city seemed to pass in slow motion. Every traffic light took forever. Every turn was a step closer to something I knew would change everything once again. When I parked the car in front of his house, the sky was already beginning to take on that orange hue of a sultry late afternoon. I got out with a tight chest and sweaty hands, and when I rang the doorbell, it felt like my heart was going to explode in my chest. David opened the door. He was wearing shorts and a white t-shirt, his hair still slightly messy, his body relaxed, but his eyes were bright, shining in a way that overwhelmed me. He smiled, and what he said came straight from the bottom of his heart. "My God, you're so beautiful. Come in." I smiled awkwardly, my cheeks flushing like a schoolboy, and replied in an almost shy tone, "You're the one who's beautiful." I went in, and the moment he closed the door, our bodies sought each other out as if they already knew the way. We kissed hungrily, urgently, with the longing of 3 days that seemed like an eternity. That kiss was no longer that of two strangers discovering each other. It was that of two men who, even without fully understanding what they were experiencing, already knew it was real. Our hearts were beating out of rhythm, as if they wanted to jump out of our mouths, as if every second apart had been wasted time. Our sweaty hands touched nervously and with desire. David held my face firmly, his warm fingers pressing lightly on my temples, his eyes locked on mine. And he said, his voice breaking, in a tone that pierced me through and through, "Handsome, what have you done to me? Man, I fell in love with you at first sight." I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked deep into his eyes, that dark depth that seemed to know everything I was hiding, and said with my soul in my mouth, "I fell in love with you too. I don't know what happened to us. I just know that I'm scared." He held my hands, squeezing them firmly, leaving no room for panic or retreat. His gaze was like a shelter in the storm that raged inside me. "Don't be afraid. I'm here with you. Everything will be fine. And one thing I know, I won't lose you. I want you with me, forever." His words broke me. They dismantled me. They rebuilt me. I swallowed my tears, swallowed my fear, and said, "I don't want to lose you either, David, ever." And we kissed again, with more strength, more surrender, more love, like two men who knew that, even with everything against them, they had found in each other the missing piece. That night was unlike any other. We gave ourselves, not like two mature men, full of defenses, scars, and fear, but like two teenagers hungry for affection, touch, truth, as if the world were going to end that dawn, and the only way to survive was to lose ourselves in each other's bodies. We kissed in the hallway, stumbling over our own footsteps, our bodies pressed together, our breaths heavy. David guided me with a sweet hunger, an urgency full of care, like someone who desires intensely but knows how to welcome with the same strength. His hands explored every part of me with reverence, as if they were touching something sacred, and it was. I had never felt that before. Not like that. Not with someone who really saw me. When we entered his room, the yellow light from the lamp cast soft shadows on the walls, and it seemed as if time had slowed down just to give us space. He laid me down slowly, looked at me as if he were looking for an answer he had been searching for his whole life, and then kissed me again. A warm, deep, slow kiss, the kind that takes your breath away little by little, as if dismantling every part of your body until only your soul remains. We undressed slowly, between smiles, touches, and sighs, as if each piece of clothing removed was also a layer of fear left behind. And when, finally, our bodies met completely, skin to skin, heart to heart, it was as if the universe fell silent for a second, just to watch. It was intense. It was real. It was raw, direct love, without rehearsal or censorship. We moved into each other as if we had been waiting for this our whole lives, and in a way, we had. He whispered my name, as if savoring those syllables was as necessary as breathing. I clung to his shoulders as if clinging to life, and every touch, every moan, every shiver was an unspoken phrase, a truth that the body finally revealed after years of silence. That night, I discovered what it meant to truly make love. No lies, no masks, no fear. And when we finished, sweaty, panting, our bodies entwined, his head resting on my chest, we lay in silence for long minutes, just feeling, just being. The warmth of our skin, the sound of our hearts, our breathing slowly returning to a calm rhythm. David looked up and whispered, with that smile that was already my refuge, "It was the best night of my life." I have. I closed my eyes and replied almost without a voice, but with all my soul. My life began today. And in that quiet room, on that warm bed, we slept in each other's arms, two men who finally found each other after a lifetime of searching. But like everything that is too intense, that night also came to an end. The clock ticked stealthily, as if to remind us that the world outside still existed. The room was warm, his body still pressed against mine, but my conscience began to pull me back to reality, my other life, my home, my wife, the lie I still maintained. I got up slowly, his scent still clinging to me, my skin marked by kisses, my heart heavy. I got dressed in silence, each piece of clothing feeling like a forced return to the prison I had built for myself for so many years. David sat up in bed, still naked, the sheet slipping down his waist, his gaze vulnerable, almost pleading, and then he said, in a low voice, laden with truth, "Please, don't go. Stay with me, forever." That tore me apart inside. The way he said forever wasn't dramatic, it was honest. A direct request from the heart of someone who, like me, had spent his life waiting for something he now didn't want to lose. I smiled, the corner of my mouth bitter, and replied in a whisper full of sadness. I wish I could, handsome, but it's much more complicated than it seems. Our eyes met for one last second that lasted too long, and there we said goodbye, without words. Just the heavy silence of those who wanted to stay, but didn't have the courage yet. I left his house with my body still warm from love, but my soul plunged into the coldness of reality. The way back was empty. The streets seemed quieter, the streetlights dimmer, as if the city understood that something inside me had broken again. When I got home, she was still awake. My wife was sitting on the couch, in her pajamas, her face lit by the blue light of the TV, which was showing some program or other. She looked at me for a few seconds and said a lukewarm, "Hi," as if greeting a housemate. I responded with a gesture, took off my shoes, and went straight to the bathroom. I took another shower, but this time the water seemed incapable of cleaning anything, because what was dirtying me now was the weight of guilt and confusion. We went to the bedroom. She came in a few minutes later, brushed her teeth, and lay down next to me. We turned off the light. And then, she sought me out. She slid her hand across the sheet until she found my body, trying to initiate something. An automatic gesture, almost formal, but it hit me like a rock. I froze. I couldn't do it. I didn't even try. My body was no longer hers. It never had been, if I'm honest. I turned away, pretending to be tired, and murmured, "I'm not feeling very well." She didn't answer. She just turned away too, and the room fell into a thick silence. I closed my eyes, and even there, in that bed that had been mine for so many years, all I could feel was the absence of David, the warmth of his skin, the way he said my name, the look in his eyes when he asked me to stay. And I went to sleep with a broken heart, not because I had left, but because I hadn't had the courage to stay. The next morning came faster than I wanted. The light filtered through the crack in the curtain and hit my face, as if the day was determined to tear me away from the little rest I had. I woke up with my body in the world, and my soul still at David's house. I felt the sheet, the mattress, the silence beside me, and everything felt wrong. My wife was already up. The smell of coffee came from the kitchen, and the muffled sound of a cup being placed on the sink brought me back to reality, the reality I no longer wanted to live. I lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, trying to take a deep breath, trying to convince myself that I could go on, that I could continue with this charade. But the taste of David's kiss was still in my mouth, and that I couldn't ignore. I got up slowly, my body heavy, each step to the bathroom as if I were walking inside an aquarium. I looked at myself in the mirror, unshaven, my eyes red, and everything in me screamed that I couldn't pretend anymore. Not after that night. In the kitchen, she was sitting with a cup in her hands, scrolling through her phone. She gave me an automatic "good morning" without taking her eyes off the screen. I replied in the same tone, sat down at the table, but didn't even touch the coffee. The silence between us was uncomfortable, but it was an old, familiar silence that had been there for a long time. She tried to bring up topics about the day, the market, cleaning the house, a problem with the car. I responded to everything with, "Uh-huh, okay, I'll see." But my head wasn't there, my heart wasn't there. It was with David. I picked up my phone reflexively. I opened the conversation. His last message was still there, from last night. "Stay with me forever." My chest tightened. I took a deep breath and typed slowly, "Good morning, handsome. I woke up missing you." He replied almost immediately, "Good morning, my love. I dreamed about you. I woke up with the pillow full of your scent. I'm here, waiting for the day you won't leave anymore." I closed my eyes. It tore me apart. It moved me. It made me want to run away from there and never come back. I knew I was reaching my limit. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I couldn't keep dividing myself between two worlds. One of them was a life that was never mine. The other was my first real chance to be myself. But for that, I would need to have courage. And at that silent breakfast, sitting at the table with the woman who shared my roof, but not my heart, I understood the lie was ending. And the next step would be definitive. The day passed as if it had its own weight, slow, thick, dragging each minute with the cruelty of someone who knows they are pushing someone against an invisible wall. I went about my routine like a ghost, crossing the rooms of the house, pretending to be normal, answering questions with short gestures and words that meant nothing, while inside a silent battle raged with every passing second. The urge to speak was immense. It was almost physical. It filled my chest, rose up my throat, tried to escape through my mouth whenever I looked into her eyes, whenever she said something about the weekend, about household bills, about any mundane thing that would once have been part of an ordinary life, but now sounded distant, irrelevant, like an echo of an existence that no longer made sense to me. I wanted to say that I couldn't take it anymore, that it wasn't fair, that I couldn't continue living with someone who, even though they had walked with me for so many years, no longer shared the same path. I wanted to look at her and say, "Forgive me, but my heart is no longer yours. Maybe it never was." But every time I rehearsed, every time I prepared myself, fear overwhelmed me. A cold, paralyzing fear that took my breath away and made me retreat as if I were on the edge of an abyss. I was afraid of hurting her deeply, of disappointing her, of destroying the ground beneath the feet of a woman who, even without passion between us, was still part of my history. I was afraid of my family's judgment, of their dirty looks, of their harsh words, of rejection, of open shame, and worst of all, I felt guilty. A heavy, intimate, silent guilt that made me question whether I was really a good man or just a coward, incapable of facing the consequences of my own desires. And at the same time, there was the other side, the one that throbbed in my chest every time I remembered David's touch, the way he looked at me as if he could see beyond my flesh, beyond my mask, beyond my fears. I was in love, completely, with an intensity that scared me, but also made me feel alive in a way I had never experienced before. With him, the world had color, had smell, had warmth. With him, I didn't have to pretend. This duality was destroying me inside. On one side, guilt and fear, holding me back in a life that was no longer mine. On the other, love calling me with a firm voice, with open arms, with a possible future, but one that still seemed too far away to reach. That night, I lay down next to her. The room was dark, silent, with that same superficial peace that had long since ceased to be a refuge for me. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest, trying to silence the turmoil that consumed me inside, but it was impossible. The image of David invaded my mind all the time, the way he said my name, how he touched me, how he looked at me. It was as if my body had returned home, but my soul had stayed with him. I turned to the side, my face buried in the pillow, and my heart in ruins. The tears came without warning, silent, hot, painful. I didn't cry because I regretted what I had experienced with David. There was no remorse, only longing, only desire, only love. But I cried because I still didn't have the courage. I cried because I wanted to be free and fair, but I was still trapped. I cried because, even though I had found what I had been looking for my whole life, I still didn't know how to let go of what I had been taught to carry. And there, lying next to a woman who slept peacefully, oblivious to the hurricane inside me, all I could think about was David's face, the way he said, "Stay with me forever," and how much I really wanted to be able to answer, "I'll stay." David and I exchanged messages throughout the day, like two kids who couldn't be apart, even when the world demanded seriousness and focus. Between appointments, amid reports, deadlines, and meetings, our cell phones became the only place where we could truly breathe. Our conversations were full of affection, longing, and promises disguised as jokes, as if each word were a silent attempt to keep alive the flame that was already consuming us from within. On a seemingly ordinary night, I was at home, sitting on the living room couch, with the TV on to some program that didn't hold my attention. My wife was next to me, not so close, but close enough to share the space and the silence. She kept her eyes fixed on the screen, oblivious to what was happening around her, while I tried to keep a neutral expression, even though my heart was aching inside. My cell phone vibrated next to me. Discreet. A sound that, in any other situation, would have gone unnoticed. But at that moment, it sounded like an alarm inside me. I calmly picked up the phone, trying to hide my feelings, and opened the notification. It was David. The message said, "Thomas, my handsome, I miss you, and there's someone here who really wants to see you too." Right after that, he sent a photo. It was an intimate image. He was holding his tool. I felt a warmth rise up my back, a mixture of nervousness and desire, as if I had suddenly been torn from that couch and thrown back into the night we were together. For a moment, I lost my breath. My hands sweated, my heart raced. I glanced discreetly to the side. My wife was still focused on the television, oblivious to everything. I remained motionless for a few seconds, trying to regain control of my breathing, pretending to be interested in what was happening on the screen. Minutes later, I picked up my phone again, claiming I needed to answer some work emails. I scrolled through the screen mechanically, trying to look busy, replying to messages without reading them properly, just to keep up the charade. When I was done, I left the phone on the sofa and went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, trying to cool my head and contain the turmoil that was forming inside. The kitchen was silent, and the water, although cold, seemed unable to calm the restlessness that was taking hold of me. I took a deep breath, lingered there for a few seconds, before returning to the living room. When I returned, the world seemed to stop. She was sitting in the same place, but now with my cell phone in her hands. Her gaze was no longer fixed on the TV, it was fixed on me, and it was a gaze filled with fury, disbelief, and pain. For a second, the silence between us was louder than any scream. "What the hell is this, Thomas?" she said, her voice faltering but full of rage. "Are you cheating on me? With a man?" I tried to get closer, to say something, anything that would at least explain what even I couldn't quite put into words. But she wouldn't let me. "You had the nerve? Here, in our own home? After everything? And you still have the audacity to hide it right under my nose?" Her words stabbed me like knives. There was no room for defense. And even if there had been, I couldn't have justified myself. Everything was there, exposed. In a quick gesture, overcome with rage, she stood up, grabbed her cell phone, and threw it against the wall. The sound of the impact was sharp, hard, final. The shattered screen fell to the floor like a symbol of what was left between us. She pointed to the door with a trembling hand, her face red, her eyes teary. "Get out of this house now. I don't want to look at your face anymore. Get lost." There was no room for reply. There was nothing to say. I went to the sideboard in the living room and took only my wallet and car keys. I took nothing else. No clothes. No explanation. No apology. I walked out the door as if abandoning an entire life in a single step. Outside, the air seemed heavier than ever. I got in the car without knowing where to go, without knowing what to do, unable to think clearly. I drove aimlessly, my thoughts jumbled, my stomach churning, and my chest tight with everything that had just happened. As much as I knew that moment was inevitable, as much as guilt consumed me inside, there was a sincere pain deep in my chest. I never wanted to hurt her. I never wanted things to get to this point. But the truth is, I no longer fit into that life. That world I had lived in for so many years was no longer mine. And now, the only thing left for me was to figure out what to do with the freedom I had so longed for, and which had finally arrived, albeit surrounded by chaos and pain. The city seemed unrecognizable that night, as if the streets were wider, darker, quieter than usual. I drove aimlessly, my face still hot, my chest burning, and my head spinning at a speed that prevented me from thinking. Every streetlight, every intersection, every tree shadow cast on the asphalt seemed to be part of a path I had no control over. And maybe I didn't. At some point, I turned the steering wheel and began to follow the route that my feet knew better than my mind wanted to admit. I didn't think. I just went. I went like someone seeking shelter after a storm, like someone looking for light in the middle of the dark. And then, without planning it, without sending a message, without any warning, I parked in front of his house. There, sitting in the car, my hands sweating on the steering wheel and my heart beating at a pace that bordered on desperation, I stared at the gate as if it were a border between everything that had fallen apart and everything that might save me. I got out slowly. The air was warm, humid, heavy with the smell of the night. I approached the door. My legs were shaking. My thoughts were still in tatters, but my body knew exactly what to do. I stretched out my arm, took a deep breath, and rang the bell. The wait was short, but it seemed endless. The door opened gently, and there he was. David. Wearing shorts, a simple t-shirt, barefoot, his eyes still sleepy, but filled with concern as soon as he saw me. His face changed immediately. That expression of someone who understands, who feels with you, who knows even without you saying a word. He didn't ask anything. He just pulled me inside gently, closed the door behind me, and wrapped his arms around me with a strength that dissolved what little resistance I had left. It was there, in that silent embrace, in that dark house, that I broke down. I cried without shame. I cried with my whole body. I cried out my fear, my guilt, my exhaustion, my pain, and I cried, above all, out of relief at being there, with him, in that space where I could exist, without hiding. David didn't let go. He just held me tighter, rested his face on my shoulder, and said, in a low, firm voice, in a way that only he knew how, "I'm here, Thomas. I'm with you. It will pass. Everything will be okay." We were silent for a few minutes. I was still breathing heavily, trying to compose myself, trying to keep myself together. Then he moved away just enough to look me in the eyes and said, in a more restrained, more intimate tone, with the weight of guilt on his shoulders, "Forgive me for sending that photo. I was impulsive. I thought it would make you smile, tease you, remind you of me. But I didn't imagine it could expose you like that, if I had known. I would never have done it." His words came with sincerity, without defense, without drama, just regret and care. That touched me deeply, because I knew he wasn't an irresponsible man, but someone who, like me, was learning to live something new, intense, full of layers and risks. I nodded slowly, took a deep breath, and said, my voice still choked with emotion, "It wasn't your fault, David. You didn't know. I'm the one who lived too long in silence, in denial. It was just a consequence. But thank you for saying that. It means a lot to me." He nodded, pulled me close again, and wrapped his arms around me as if he wanted to shield my body from the world. At that moment, even with everything upside down, even with my chest torn apart inside, I felt that there, in that house of dim light and welcoming silence, I was safe. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. The house was immersed in a dense silence, the kind that doesn't bother you, but welcomes you, as if each wall understood that inside there were two hearts, trying to recover after days of tension, difficult choices, and truths that came to light more brutally than anyone wanted. The soft sound of the fan spinning in the corner, along with the slight rustling of the leaves outside, created an almost hypnotic backdrop, as if the world had decided to speak more softly that night so that we could finally breathe. David led me to the bedroom with slow steps, saying nothing, just keeping his hand on mine, as if the simple gesture of touching me was a way of anchoring me in the present, of saying without words that I no longer had to carry everything alone. The yellowish, dim light from the lamp cast soft shadows on the furniture and light-colored sheets, making the space even more intimate, more secure, as if everything in it had been prepared, unintentionally, to be a shelter at that very moment. I slowly took off my shoes, as if I were still undressing from the day that had just ended. David did the same, and without ceremony, we lay down side by side, without the urgency of those seeking pleasure, but with the sincere need to be close, to rest our souls in each other's bodies, to feel that, after so long fighting against ourselves, we were finally allowed to just exist. He turned in bed, leaned his chest against my back, and put his arm around me with a care that almost made me cry again. I felt the warmth of his body slowly enveloping me, as if he were not pressing, not demanding, but offering himself. His fingers slid to mine, and when he intertwined them, it was as if he was silently telling me that I was there in my entirety, that he accepted me with everything I brought with me, the pain, the doubts, the remnants of a broken life, and the fear that still insisted on living inside me. And so, hand in hand, our bodies entwined in a stillness that said more than any conversation, we slept. It was not a heavy or deep sleep, it was a light rest, interrupted by small awakenings, long sighs, almost involuntary gestures of closeness in the dark. But even so, it was the most peaceful sleep I had had in years. Falling asleep in his arms was like coming home after a long time lost. There was something healing in that silence, in that shared warmth, in that simplicity of constant, present, unhurried touch. And for the first time in a long time, the weight on my chest didn't seem unbearable. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for being exactly where I wanted to be. That bed, in that modest room, on that night when everything had fallen apart, became the only place in the world where I felt whole. It wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a refuge, it was a promise, it was a beginning. I awoke to the touch of David's lips, gently brushing the skin on my neck, in slow, delicate movements, as if he wanted to wake me from my sleep without haste, bringing me back to the world with gestures rather than words. His breath mingled with mine, warm and steady, while his hand slid firmly and tenderly down the side of my body, exploring every curve with almost reverent care, like someone touching something they desire and, at the same time, deeply respect. I turned slowly, still sleepy, and met his gaze, a serene gaze, but one laden with intention, with restrained desire, with an affection that needed no announcement. And in that moment, in the silence of the early morning, with the morning light just beginning to seep through the cracks in the curtains, I knew that I needed no explanation for what was to come. We gave ourselves to each other with an intensity that did not come from novelty, but from depth. There was more than attraction there. There was surrender, acceptance, and a trust that grew between us with every touch, every sigh, every sustained gaze. Our bodies came together with frightening naturalness, as if they had always belonged to each other, and everything around us disappeared, leaving room only for what was happening between us without haste, without fear, without noise. The way he touched me was not urgent, but full of intention. Every gesture seemed to say, "I see you, I feel you, you can be whole here." And I allowed myself to be whole. I allowed myself not to think, not to plan, just to feel. And when finally, the silence was filled by our heavier breathing, by our bodies pressed together, sweaty and exhausted, we remained together, in silence, breathing each other in, like those who know that moment was necessary, inevitable, and true. But, as always happens when reality awaits us just beyond the closed door, it didn't take long for it to start creeping back in, first as a light thought, then as a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, until it became a weight on my chest. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to hold on for a few more minutes to that silent shelter where the outside world did not exist. But it was too late. What needed to be faced was calling me back urgently. The smell of the room, the warm temperature of David's skin still pressed against mine, the muffled sound of the morning beginning outside. None of this could stop the avalanche that was already forming inside me. Because, as much as I wanted to stay there, motionless, embracing the only thing that made me feel at peace, I knew that time had started running again. And with it came all the questions that awaited me outside. I needed to think about what I would do from then on. And as much as part of me was still there, in that bed, my thoughts were already returning to what I had left behind the house that was no longer mine. The woman who, for so long, believed she was living with someone she knew, and now, perhaps, saw me as a stranger. It was inevitable. I would have to go back. I needed to face her gaze, walk through the door that had been slammed shut in anger, and enter, even if silently, to collect what remained of my previous life. My clothes, my documents, small objects that for years had been part of the routine of a home that now no longer made sense. More than just belongings, it was my own history that was scattered throughout that house, and I knew that reviewing it, piece by piece, would be painful but necessary. At that moment, lying next to David, his breath still warming the curve of my shoulder, all I wanted was to stay and forget. But I couldn't run away anymore, not from the pain, not from the responsibility, not from the choices that had finally ceased to be internal and had become visible, irreversible. I needed to go back to the past so I could leave it behind. The truth is, I don't know how it will be. I have no idea how she will receive me, what words will be said, whether there will be silence, anger, tears, or just that emptiness that remains when everything breaks inside. I only know that I need to go. I need to face it. I need to seek what is left of that life, and understand, calmly and respectfully, how to leave everything behind without further destroying those who have already been hurt. Inside me, there is still a tangle of feelings that are difficult to name. There is fear. Yes, a paralyzing fear of facing her eyes, of dealing with everything I spent years avoiding. There is shame, That shame that comes from knowing that I hid a part of myself for so long that I built a routine on silence. And now, with everything exposed, I find myself naked before someone who did not deserve to live in this doubt. And of course, I still carry guilt for causing pain, for not being stronger, more honest, quicker to free myself. But at the same time, there is something new inside me. Something that pulses, that burns, that breathes strongly, a feeling that, despite everything, I am finally moving toward myself. And maybe this is the first real step I've taken in a long time. When I go there, get my things, face all of this, I'll come back to tell you about it. I'll come back to share with you how it was, what I felt, what remained, what hurt, and what, perhaps, was also healed in the process. Kisses. And see you soon. Oh, and for those who want to read everything without interruptions, from beginning to end, with every detail, every silence, every truth, the uncut version is in the comments. Thank you for walking with me this far.